Hello, I'm Ann Gritch, and I'm delighted to welcome you to this segment of the oral history of the Diocese of San Jose. I am particularly delighted today because with me is Lynda DeManti, who is one of the founding mothers of the diocese. And as we talk, you will understand why she has that designation. So Lynda, welcome.
Thank you.
So first of all, tell us about your background. You grew up in the Archdiocese of San Francisco?
I did. I grew up in the Archdiocese of San Francisco. I consider St. Veronica's in South San Francisco my home parish. So I was in that parish from the 5th grade till my early 20s.
Okay, all right. Now, did you begin ministry then at St. Veronica's?
Yes, my first ministry was changing the cards from Latin to English.
All right.
Collecting them after each Mass.
So that would have been not too long after the council.
Yes, right after the council.
Wow.
So.
That's a great start.
Yeah, passing out liturgical cards,
right.
Kind of interesting.
It was kind of a portent for the future. So what brought you to San Jose?
I got engaged.
Okay, you want to talk a little bit about that?
So I got engaged to my husband, Ange, and I moved to San Jose because this is where he was. And that transition was a little difficult for me because it was out of my environment, but I continued working in San Francisco at the time for the insurance industry. And then a year later, we got married.
All right.
So.
Okay. So which parish were you in then in San Jose?
We traveled a little bit, but Transfiguration was my parish.
Okay. Now, was Father Bill Leninger there at the time or no?
Bill Leninger was a parochial vicar and Speed Hoffman was the pastor.
Yes. Okay.
So we taught religious education there and were involved a little bit. And then I was unhappy with the liturgical style at Transfiguration, so I went to St. Patrick's because Dan Derry, who's been a mentor since 1971, was there at the Newman Center, and he was stationed at St. Pat's.
So then, were you on staff at St. Patrick's or were you volunteering?
No, I was actually, I got sick, quit my job, and then became a full-time volunteer at the Newman Center at San Jose State with Dan.
Oh, all right. So were you there? Where were you when the announcement was made, January 27, 1981?
So I actually had been hired the previous April as the part-time liturgy coordinator at St. Patrick's. I was very excited, went home and told Ange I had a part-time job. And when the announcement came, the day before the announcement, I got a phone call from Donna Rader asking me how many electrical plugs were in the church.
I see.
Not a question that you know off the top of your head usually. But it was a Monday, and it had been rumored, and most announcements came from Rome on Tuesdays.
Right.
So it had been rumored, and Dan said, oh, something's up. So Donna said there would be a press conference tomorrow, and then I think we went back to St. Patrick's and tried to get information, and it still was not being vague. So we kind of set up for the press conference and got things together, and the morning of January 27th, there was a big sign, Benvenidos to Bishop Dumaine, on the front door with Dan Derry's dogs on either side laying there to greet the bishop.
The new bishop.
The new bishop of the new diocese.
Were you excited? What was your reaction about us becoming a diocese?
Well, you know, it's pretty interesting because I kind of figured, oh, okay, big deal, it's not going to affect me. And you know, it had been rumored for years that Santa Clara County would break off from the Archdiocese of San Francisco, but it was like, oh, okay, and we set up this press conference, and I remembered that Archbishop Quinn's socks didn't match. And it was that we were becoming a diocese and breaking off from the Archdiocese of San Francisco, and there were press there and everything. I don't think I really knew the impact at that moment, what that announcement had, and what the impact would be on me personally or the people of Santa Clara County.
Right. At that time, I'm trying to remember, was it announced at that same time that St. Patrick would be the cathedral?
Yes, it was
Okay.
announced at the
So
same
that
time.
must have been
So
thinking, perhaps my
I'm
job
in
is
my
going to double.
job. I've been in my job 9 months. We
Right.
now are a cathedral, and I had been doing liturgy and planning liturgy even when I was at St. Veronica's, but it was like, okay, how does this really impact the parish, and how does it impact, the rest of the staff and the people, the parishioners? So we became a diocese on the 27th of January, and then went into planning mode of the inaugural events of the diocese. And I wasn't officially on that committee, but I was called a number of times about things. And so
I think, wasn't Monsignor Jean Boyle, did he head that?
Monsignor Jean Boyle was the chair, I believe. And then the powers that were going to be leaders in the diocese. So Monsignor Mitchell, Sister Pat Marie Bell Peters, Sister Claude Powers were on that committee. I think Father Mitchell was on that, I'm not positive. And then Donna Rader was on it, Father Larry Largenti, who was the present pastor at St. Patrick's, was on it. Dan Derry was on it.
You're right, these are the leaders of the diocese.
Yeah, and they began planning it, and of course, first thing was finding a place big enough to celebrate this event. So they divided the event into, on the 17th of March, they had a celebration with the clergy of the Archdiocese of San Francisco. And they had Vespers at St. Patrick's, and then they had a dinner. And I know that this was the first time, because the Archdiocese had split several times.
Right.
This was the first time that priests had a choice to move, as long as it was equal amount. So they celebrated on the 17th of March with the clergy alone. Then on the 18th of March, there was a evening Vespers. I didn't even know what evening Vespers was at that time. So anyway, I'm putting together things I didn't even know about.
That's when the nuncio was there.
Yes, and actually, Father Shea was also, Maurice Shea
yeah.
was a part of it. So one of my first tasks was, Father Shea came to me and said they needed flagons for the celebration of the Eucharist at
The Center for the Performing Arts,
yes.
which was a fairly new building at
Yes.
that time. Yeah.
So I said, okay, and where do I get these? And he said, oh, call Santa Clara. So I was a dutiful follower with not looking up what the word flagon is or having any idea of what it meant. And I called the president of the University of Santa Clara, and his secretary took a message, and Father Rewalk called me back and said, well, now that I went to the dictionary to find out what flagons are, no, we don't have any.
That's a great story.
So I went out and bought flagons, decanters. So we celebrated with evening prayer. Every parish was given 6 tickets to come to that event. That is where they erected the cathedral. That's where the cathedral was named, with the nuncia. And the funny story about that is Father Art Harrison had too many people in his pew. And I said, you need to remove someone. And he said, do you want me to ask my associate to be moved? And I said, if that's who it is, that associate is Monsignor Celia. So that was the celebration there. And then the next day, it was pouring rain.
Yes, I remember that day.
So pouring rain seemed to be a follower of Bishop DeManti, because every major event we had for a long time, it was pouring rain. But we had it at the Center for Performing Arts, and that building is in a circular part, so to go from one side to other backstage, you have to go around in a circle. And Donna Rader said to me, I will wear a red jacket so that you can spot me. She didn't know that all the ushers in the CPA wore red jackets. So we had the celebration, and at that celebration, I organized the gift bearers, which were many, and there were leftover gifts, so I just picked them up and carried them. And then at the fraction rite, there was nobody who poured the precious blood, and that time it was only for the clergy, but there was a significant amount of clergy there. So I picked up the flagon and started pouring, and Dan Derry says, don't spill it. So that was my first introduction of being kind of the person in a significant leader that you think on your feet.
Yeah, exactly.
You know.
But that Mass, I will never forget Archbishop Quinn seating Bishop DeManti, and the whole place just erupted.
Yeah. It was an extremely exciting event.
It really was. It was just new beginnings, no baggage.
Right. And Bishop DeManti was wonderful in the sense that he had a number of classmates who had left active ministry, and he included them in that particular celebration.
Yeah, that was. So Bishop DeManti's cathedral was from 81 till 91, so for 10 years. Yeah. How did that impact the parish?
Well, first off, the first 6 months, 8 months, I mean, there was no office for the diocese, there was no anything, and so Bishop DeManti had an office. I was very excited because he brought a self-correcting Selectric typewriter.
Wow.
Then, and we didn't have one in the building, and it was great because I was used to the corporate world, and Donna didn't know how to use it and was kind of frightened by it. It was like, okay, it's not to be frightened. But you know, we began to set up. They set up the offices. He named people for the staffing positions. They decided that St. Joseph's Seminary would be the headquarters. The cathedral became the meeting place. So Father Larry Largenti was extremely hospitable to all, and it became the gathering for lunch. We had many hot dog lunches, very limited budget, but we fed everybody who came through the door. So if you were in the neighborhood at lunchtime, they kind of stopped at the cathedral for lunch.
I remember, too, you had wonderful hospitality ministers.
Yes.
I'm thinking of a particular couple, Alonzo?
Alonzo and Martha.
Yeah, they were terrific. Yeah.
We, began, in the first event that the bishop presided on was the 1-year anniversary of the death of Oscar Romero.
So that would have been in April, not too long.
March. It was the Sunday right after the 19th. And so, what do you do when you plan things? And then we had the first Chrism Mass, and of course, I had no idea what a Chrism Mass was. And, things were very simple. We used the little black boxes that they used to use in the old days with the oil vessels in them.
Yes.
And Father Shea said, could you get some flowers to put in front of them so they don't look so bad? And, you know, it was all kind of new. Everything was new. I mean, getting new vestments for the bishop, getting new diocesan stoles. I worked with the sisters on Lincoln Avenue, became very good friends with them because I was there getting a lot of things.
Sure. They were terrific too. I'm sorry that they're not with us
Yeah.
anymore. They were really, really good. Yeah.
So we muddled through, you know, the first Chrism Mass and the first Holy Week. And the bishop only came to St. Pat's as far as liturgical, only for major feasts for the most part. It was, the rest of it was a parish church.
Yeah. And of course you had a school.
Right, we had a school.
Yeah, exactly.
And we had loaves and fishes at the time.
Now, was it 1984 when Father Dick Hilliard came on board as director of the Office of Word and Worship?
Yes.
Yeah. So you started to work closely with him.
Yes,
on
so
diocese.
I had gone to the bishop. So two things. I had no liturgical background training or higher education. And when the bishop when St. Patrick's got named cathedral, I went to Bishop DeManti and said, look, you inherited me, and if you want to replace me, that's okay, but I'm not sure I'm the right person for this job. And he said, oh no, you'll just learn and we'll just train you. It'll be fine.
That's such a Bishop DeManti approach.
It was.
Yeah.
And the first Holy Week, we sat down to plan Holy Week, and I came with my missalette, and he said, you never come with the missalette, you come with the sacramentary and you read the rubrics. So from then on, I began to self-educate myself and read lots of things, and we actually began liturgical formation even before Father Hilliard was in the office, because it must have been at 1983, because in 1983 we had formed a liturgical commission. But I went and represented the diocese at the FDLC meeting and a number of things when we didn't have an office of worship at the time.
That's the Federation of Diocesan Liturgical Commissions.
Yes.
In case our audience is not aware.
Right. And so I went to that meeting. And I mean, you know, I was young. I was in my 20s. And so it was a very exciting
Time. So tell us about, and I was on board at this time, and you and I worked very closely together when the St. Joseph's Cathedral opened, and the incredible, marvelous transfer that we did.
So
and
it
didn't rain that day.
It didn't rain that day. It was a wonderful day celebration. And because the diocese was still new, you know, for everything, we incorporated people, government people, city people, that kind of thing. So they closed Santa Clara Street between 9th and Santa Clara to the cathedral, actually to Market Street. And the idea was that the staff and leadership of St. Pat's would walk down the street, and then on the corner of Market, we handed over things to the representatives of St. Joseph's. Father Jerry Helfrich was the incoming rector of the cathedral, and at that time, Father Justin Zawatsky was the outgoing rector of the cathedral. And so they transferred, and there was a big stage set up on Market Street where we read proclamations, and then we opened the doors of the cathedral.
Yeah.
Which was an exciting moment,
Really
because
was.
I was thinking of this morning. The renovation of the cathedral, like many things at the beginning of the diocese, was like opening up a can of worms. So we had the '89 earthquake, which destroyed St. Joseph's Seminary and the diocesan office at the time, I think. And there were every time they turned around, there was something that they needed to add to the cathedral. So the expense of the cathedral was very expensive for
It
that
was
time.
beyond what had been projected.
Right.
Yeah.
But so it had been retrofitted just before the '89 earthquake. Otherwise, I'm not sure it would have been survived. But once people came in and looked at it and saw it, it began to be the center, and it made much more sense for it to be at St. Joseph's. One of the reasons that it was not at St. Joseph's in the beginning was because St. Joseph's was not liturgically correct.
Yeah, it needed to be updated.
Right.
Yeah.
It needed to be.
Right. It's amazing. It really is. So tell us about the times when you worked closely with the Office for Word and Worship. Those were the times when we had national meetings
we had
here. We did
national meetings. We had diocesan meetings. We did, at that time, in the '80s, we had many more paid liturgical coordinators. The Office of Worship started training ministers, and the office trained over 6,000 liturgical ministers at the time in all the parishes. We did some very exciting things. I mean, so Father Richard Hilliard was the director and very creative. The things that we do presently at the Chrism Mass, he really started.
Mm-hmm.
You became the director. You created more things. Sister Betty Gambanini, so I've worked with 4 directors, Sister Betty Gambanini and then Diana McIntyre until recently.
Yeah.
So I have always worked closely with the office and liturgical events in the diocese, and had an opportunity to set vision for the diocese in working with all of you.
One of the exciting things that was at that time too is so many of the revised rituals had come out. Remember?
Yes.
The funeral rite particularly. I remember we set up a wonderful in-service with Father Richard Rutherford from Oregon, who was kind of the man who knew the ritual. The marriage rite, we did some stuff with, and the rite of penance came out, and of course the RCIA.
Right.
I mean, we did a lot of education around those as soon as they came out.
We used those opportunities to gather people.
Yeah, it really, really was true. Absolutely. So you stayed at St. Patrick's, which then became the Proto-Cathedral, for how long?
I stayed at St. Patrick's for another, 2 years after it became a cathedral. And then St. Patrick's, the Jesuits decided to withdraw from the cathedral
Right.
and withdraw from Holy Family Parish and put their efforts into Most Holy Trinity Parish.
And St. Clair too, they withdrew from St. Clair.
And they wanted to be in an area that was primarily multi-ethnic and poorer than other parishes. And so they took on Most Holy Trinity, and that realigned things a little bit. So Monsignor Pat Brown was appointed as the rector of the cathedral and as the pastor of the Proto-Cathedral. And so when that happened, it was an opportunity to move and to, so I was offered a position at St. Simon's in Los Altos, by Father Lou Andre. And if we were to rate parishes in 1992 from liberal to conservative, it would have been Transfiguration as the far left, Our Lady of Peace at the far right, and then St. Simon's. So Father Andre really wanted to have someone with experience, and I arrived in August, and he wanted to introduce communion from the cup in September, And I said, could we hold off a little bit because it's a little too quick. So we worked together at that time and started talking about renovating St. Simon's. And they had just removed the tabernacle from the altar and had removed the altar rail just before I had gotten there.
And St. Simon, of course, it had a pastor for a million years.
Yes, it had a pastor, Father Spoonser, who said when Vatican II opened the window, he caught pneumonia. So he did not embrace the liturgical changes at that time.
So that must have been a challenge then in terms of just educating the assembly.
It was a challenge, first off, to go to a multi-ethnic, diverse community to
A
a
wealthy,
very
white-
wealthy white community. So it took lots of stamina and thick skin. But after 7 years, we built a gym, and then we renovated the church and opened it in June of
The
'99.
church is beautiful. Yeah. So what were some of the joys working at St. Simon?
The joys were certainly completing the renovation, but also at that parish, I began a funeral ministry where there's a reception for almost every funeral done by the parishioners. RCIA was an exciting time, and just renovating the church and having the people embrace a Vatican II celebration of the liturgy.
And now you're at Santa Teresa and have been there for how long?
15.
No. My goodness. Wow. So what were the challenges at Santa Teresa? So you've really served in different pockets of the diocese,
Yes.
just in terms of socioeconomic.
So I went to Santa Teresa in 2002.
Too, if it's 15 years. Do the math, Lynda.
Yeah, I know. Do the math, right? Yeah. So that was at the height of the sex scandal in the church.
Uh-huh.
So that was a difficult low point of the church.
Now, was Father Ray Kenny pastor?
No, Father Ray Kenny, Rosemary Capitolo, and Sandy Morey had all retired.
Ah, okay.
Kind of, Sandy and Ray retired together, and Rosemary had retired a year before.
Okay.
So,
Who was pastor?
Christopher Bennett.
Oh, Father Chris Bennett. Ah.
So, who came in with great enthusiasm and barrels of changes.
Which is difficult for the folk.
Yes, very difficult to have such an involved pastor in everything. But we are restored orders, so we celebrate the sacraments of confirmation and Eucharist with our children. We have a no school, which has its advantages. We are a primarily Anglo community with a probably largest ethnic group would be Filipino.
Yeah.
So it's a smaller parish. And without a school, having come from St. Simon's and St. Patrick's, that changes how you work with people
Oh, sure.
and build community. So you don't have the natural children-parent community with a school that you have. So you have to build it with the faith formation group and that kind of thing.
Yes, absolutely. So, as one of the founding mothers, over the years, what changes have you seen in the diocese itself?
Well, one of the things that I am extremely grateful for is that Bishop DeManti placed women in a position of leadership throughout the diocese. So the diocesan offices were headed by women who were educated, competent, and had a vision. And I think one of the things looking today, we have less and less women in significant roles in our diocese.
Another change that I'm so aware of, and I'm sure you are too, in fact, you've alluded to it, is the ethnic mix in the diocese. We are incredibly well balanced among all of our
Right.
folk.
And that brings, so when we formed the Liturgical Commission, one of the committees that was a subcommittee of the commission was multiculturalism. And we formed that committee with someone from the Filipino community, someone from the Hispanic community, Vietnamese community, Korean community,
Polish, probably.
Chinese.
The Chinese.
And what we realized is they couldn't talk to each other. That was the first thing. It was like, they're not all English speaking, and that wasn't their first language. So trying to have a multicultural discussion when each of those cultures were trying to be trying to find their way in an Anglo community, they weren't as set as we are now. You know, now we can call them together and do a multicultural celebration. But at that time, even having a meeting was an extreme struggle. One of the gifts of the diocese is the diversity.
Definitely.
You know, it is a huge diversity.
And not only among our people, but also among our priests.
Yes.
That our people can see priests who look like them.
Yes. And have similar experiences.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, definitely.
so that's, you know, one of the things. I think the other thing is one of the low points is always that we have had several reorganizations of the diocesan office. So with each reorganization, there is change, and change is good, but it's also difficult. And so we have had change where we have lost some very significant people. And we are in the process of another reorganization where I'm not sure the direction that it's going in. I think one of the things also is because of economics, we have smaller and smaller staffs. So our staffs are called upon to do more and more and to be more generalists than specific ministers. So I started out as the liturgy coordinator. In my present parish, I do liturgy, social justice, RCIA, and administration work. So,
But on the other hand, the whole title of pastoral associate has evolved throughout. That was not a position that was even thought of before.
I mean, we had a few, but I mean, the other thing is, for instance, liturgy people, we had paid liturgy part-time, full-time. At one point, 26 out of the 53 parishes
had someone on staff.
I think if we have 5 in the diocese now, we're lucky.
Yeah. What about technology? How do you think that's impacted the diocese?
Technology has certainly impacted our ability to communicate. So this is something that we've been doing in the last couple of years. Our ability to communicate with our parishioners on a more instant thing between Facebook, Twitter, emails, and web pages, we are able to get messages out. I think sometimes we lose the personal touch and we lose the personal
The face-to-face kind of time?
the face-to-face thing. And at the beginning of the diocese, we were very much of a family. We celebrated things together. If someone died, we knew about it and we supported people and we celebrated their life. We have less and less of that today, I think.
So what do you think are the challenges from going forward from today?
Well, challenges are always, I think leadership is one of the challenges. I think that we have a number of priests who like to do sacramental ministry, but they don't like to be leaders in parish communities. So how do we balance needing that central leader with communities? Certainly economics, because this is one of the most expensive places to live.
And getting more so.
And getting more so, and dealing with money as far as where people give their money, raising money, and supporting parishes and outreach efforts, I think, is a challenge.
Mm-hmm. And the gifts of the diocese, we've already talked about the multiculturalism. I think our size.
Yes, the fact that we can go from one end of the diocese to the other end of the diocese in non-traffic in 45 minutes to an hour is a great thing. The fact that we have enough diversity that if you're not happy in one parish, there's a parish close by that you might be happy in. Mm-hmm. The fact that we don't have parish boundaries, that we work together on some things, that we become more collaborative on areas of wide view, I think, areas of justice, outreach, and that kind of thing. And I think that we are still young.
We are.
In the church, and therefore we are still called to continually change and respond to what's happening in the world. So I think our schools have done a great job of integrating technology in this valley and those kinds of things. And then it gets overflowed to the parishes. Mm-hmm. But I think that we are, I think because of my own personal experience and my own development and training, one of the things that Father Steve Tudis has taught me at the very early time of the diocese was, it's not we and they. It's not the parish against the diocese. We're all together. And I think that that is a hard message for people, clergy, lay people, and parishioners to understand. Mm-hmm. I don't think we've gotten that yet. It's not that we are working against each other. It's that we should be working in harmony with each other.
Mm-hmm. Any final thoughts before we finish? This has been just a wonderful conversation.
I think the other thing, I think that with Bishop McGraw, he certainly came into this diocese from the Archdiocese, which was very different than the Diocese of San Jose. He adapted to that. He has provided leadership, and now we are, I think, moving towards his retirement, and who do we get next, and what will those changes bring?
Yeah.
Because we have had two bishops that certainly have recognized lay leadership. Mm-hmm. The development, I think the other big development that I forgot to mention was the whole development with Bishop DeManti in conjunction with Santa Clara University and the pastoral ministry program that he wanted people educated, and then the founding of the Institute of Lay Ministry, and that continuation to today. Mm-hmm. But not every person coming into this diocese will understand that. I think that's the other part. There's a certain apprehension, mm-hmm. because we are very comfortable for the most part. We have had two great bishops.
Wonderful bishops, yeah.
That certainly Bishop PJ has built upon what Bishop DeManti started, recognizing the gifts that Bishop DeManti laid as the foundation.
He is very generous in always acknowledging Bishop
And
Beer.
I would hope his successor would be as generous on building on his vision also.
Well, that's a prayer we can certainly make.
Yeah.
Lynda, thank you so much for being with us. This has just been a very enriching and fun conversation. So thank you.
Thank you, Anne.